Hello, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited for this.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on. I'm really happy to be here and talk about philosophy, as I very much like doing. So, yeah, who am I? What do I do? Well, I am currently a grad student at Princeton University. I mainly work on topics in like metaphysics and philosophy of time and metaethics and philosophy of religion. I do popular and scholarly level work in philosophy. So on the popular level, I have a YouTube channel called Majesty of Reason, which is objectively the best YouTube channel that has ever existed. Um,
I agree.
I have I have, let's see, I've got a blog by the same name, and I've got some books and papers that people can check out on my website. It's just josephschmid.com. That's a little bit about who I am.
What made you choose philosophy as your major focus in your life?
Good question. Hard question. Let's see. I mean, I've always been asking these kind of like big fundamental questions, questions about God and religion and science and evolution and human origins. I've just always been really interested in that ever since I kind of read up on these topics in like elementary school. So, just kind of naturally enough, I just had a kind of inquisitive personality. I would be talking with classmates about these topics. I'd be debating online. I remember in like fourth or fifth grade, I got an iPod Touch and I went on Instagram and I was like debating topics in like ethics and various different things. So I've always been interested in these kind of deep topics. And naturally enough, in early high school, I kind of just found myself into academic philosophy and I found papers and I was like, whoa, there's this huge library of resources that I was previously unaware of. And now I can take full advantage of it. So I just started reading kind of voraciously in philosophy. So it kind of just naturally grew out of an inquisitive personality, but also just my upbringing. I've had parents who supported education and learning, and initially I was in love with science, but I think I just kind of it didn't really scratch the itch of all my questions, and I wanted to go kind of deeper and more abstract. So yeah.
What kind of questions that science couldn't answer?
Good. Yeah, a lot of them. So like one was just directly the questions about value, like how we should live our lives and what's good and bad and right and wrong. I had lots of questions about that, and while scientific findings certainly can inform our reasoning about that, it's not like science alone that's going to be able to determine what's right and wrong and so on. It's not like you can like, look into the ion chamber and see the wrongness of something or like see the
Yeah,
rightness of something. Um, but of course, science can inform those debates by telling us what causes pain and pleasure and so on. But it's a separate non-scientific question as to whether or not pain is bad and whether or not there are certain permissible ways of causing it, etc. So, like questions of value and morality. Also, various other questions. Just lots of these questions about like the fundamental nature of reality. Like, um, does God exist? I wasn't. I don't think science alone can kind of determine that question. We have to bring in various tools in philosophy, um, and just so many of the kind of perennial topics in philosophy. How can we know anything? How do we know that the senses are reliable? Like using science presupposes that the senses are reliable. So you can't use science to show that your senses are reliable.
I see.
So just these sorts of questions. Yeah.
Um, did most of your friends in high school consider you some kind of a nerd, and how do you react when they call you that? Because I myself, when I ask that kind of question,
Yeah.
people still think, yeah. So,
Yeah. That's good. I mean, it did happen some. It didn't really bother me all that much. I mean, here's the thing. You can kind of get out of a lot of the this is unfortunate, right? I don't endorse this. This is a descriptive fact. I'm not making any normative claims about this.
yeah,
Um, it's just a descriptive fact that you can avoid a lot of bullying and negative attitudes if you're pretty athletic and if you're
yeah,
like well regarded among the athletes at a school or something like that. And I was like that. I made varsity for our school like my freshman year, so I was always very athletic. In addition to just loving philosophy and having a
I
passion for these
see.
sorts of things, so for better or worse, that probably prevented a great deal of bullying and so on. But yeah, I can still people still said things like that, and I'm cool with it. I think that's my love. I mean, if you want to describe it as nerdy, that's cool. I don't really care.
What is the philosophy behind Majesty of Reason, your YouTube name? Why do you choose that name?
Good. Yeah, why did I choose that name? So I came across this Baruch Spinoza quote
Yeah.
that I loved, and the quote is, "What altar of refuge can a man find for himself when he commits treason against the majesty of reason?" And it just stuck with me. I love that quote. Like, what altar? Like, there's no altar of refuge if you're contravening reason. It's this ideal that's kind of higher than me in some sense. Like the standards and principles of reason and logic and um, inquiry and so on. It's these standards that are, yeah, in some sense, um, above me. I don't know. They're kind of like, in some manner, transcendent, and I don't mean any kind of spooky kind of divine
I see.
sense of that, but they're just deep values that I hold, and so there's these values of rational inquiry and intellectual virtue and just all these things encapsulated by reason. It's like the intellectual virtues, rigorous reasoning, rational reflection, informed dialogue, etc. So it speaks to my values. It's comes from a quote from a great philosopher, and it's a beautiful quote. I love it. So that's really behind it. It just kind of speaks to my values.
So it's fair if I say that the reason behind you choose that name is because it sounded cool.
It sounded cool, firstly, and secondly, it's yeah, it expresses me and what I'm after. Like
I
my
see.
channel
Yeah.
is not meant to be defending a particular tribe on this
I see. Yeah.
landscape of warring factions. Instead,
Yeah.
I'm trying to help everyone reason better. I'm trying to help each of the warring tribes. I wish they weren't at war, but yeah, I'm trying to help each of the warring tribes kind of think better, reason better, and just equip people with the tools of philosophy and critical thinking to kind of just sharpen their ideas and help everyone get to the truth.
I see. So, the story behind why did I found you in YouTube was when you did a video collaboration with Stephen Woodford from Rationality Rules. Yeah, and then I was like, wow, this dude this can go to toe with Stephen Woodford. And then when I saw your Arsenal banner behind you, and I get, wow, so this guy is American, then and he likes football. Sorry to say that because it's international thing. I'm not going to call it soccer for loyalty reason. And then when I check all your YouTube, I find that you wrote a book about existential inertia. What is that, and why do you feel the urge to write that down? Well, write the book about it.
Yeah, so good question. So I think it's helpful to think first about mechanical inertia, or what we might call physical inertia, or Newtonian inertia, right? So if we all go back to high school physics class, and I'm simplifying quite a bit here, so physics
It's okay.
physics nerds, don't scream at me, okay? Uh, but basically, like Newtonian inertia is the idea that bodies tend to remain in motion and they don't need some kind of external impetus continually pushing them along. No, they just maintain their rectilinear motion unless acted upon by some external force. And they maintain that. They like kind of continue in their motion again without that need of continual impetus from without, which is in contradistinction to what Aristotle thought. Aristotle thought that when there's projectile motion, or when anything is moving through space, it's going to need some sort of like continual impetus to keep on going, or something like that. Or at least that's what many people in the secondary literature interpret Aristotle as saying. That's probably how I should put it. Okay. So there's this idea in Newtonian inertia, and it's basically just applying that not to physical motion, but rather existence and persistence through time. So instead of like focusing on things continuing in their rectilinear motion without a continual external impetus pushing them along, the idea of existential inertia is that things continue in existence
Mhm.
unless things continue in existence without being continually bestowed or gifted existence from without by a sustaining cause that continuously keeps them in existence.
Yeah.
And they persist unless and until they're kind of causally destroyed by something. So it's just like the Newtonian thing, right? Things continue without that external impetus, and they go off their rectilinear motion unless and until, or they go off when some net force acts upon them, right? And that's similar to when something destroys an object, right? So things persist in existence without some external sustaining cause that keeps them in existence, until, of course, they're knocked out of existence by some cause. So that's the basic idea. Why did I write the book? Well, because there's a huge gap in the literature. Basically, like, this is a fascinating topic in metaphysics, philosophy of time, and philosophy of religion, and it was ripe for further research, and I had been doing that research, and so I wanted to fill that gap. There were many points yet to be made, many distinctions and clarifications yet to be made in the literature on existential inertia, and there was just a lot of arguments, new arguments for and against that I can contribute to and respond to, etc. And that's kind of the purpose behind the book, is just to fill a major gap in the literature.
Yeah, I haven't read that book yet because is it available at Kindle?
Were you asking if it's available in Kindle? I'm
Yeah.
not sure. I know the ebook. I know it can be bought as an ebook, but you might just have to use Springer's website. I will
I
tell
see.
people it's quite expensive. I had no control over that. These are academic presses,
Yeah.
so they're mainly serving academic libraries, right? And libraries have a lot of money, and they usually buy like bundles from these big presses, so they get like access to them, and it's much cheaper for the libraries to purchase them in like big bundles. So that's the main reason why it's very expensive. But if it's prohibitive and people can't afford it, they can always email me, and I have ways to help them. So people, if you can't afford it, definitely reach out to me via email.
Okay, I'm going to reach out to you after this one, and I hope when you send me one to Indonesia, you send me the signed copy from you. You have to sign it, Joe Schmid to Fuad,
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, I can't promise people that I will personally send copies, but I'll just nebulously say that I have ways to help people. Basically,
I see.
that's the idea.
Okay. Okay. It seemed to me that God is one of your most favorite topic in philosophy. I see you even published a video about God arguments around 11 hours length. That's quite amazing. And then you spend another 1 hour and a half talking about Kalam arguments. Why?
Yeah, great. There are many ways I could answer that why question. One is a kind of just personal historical thing, and another one is like giving you interesting like reasons that justify the study of religion and God and philosophy of religion. So I'll kind of go both of them. Um, the kind of personal historical reasons are that, I was brought up in a very devout religious home, and so my upbringing is very much tied to a particular religious tradition, and I also went to private schools that educated me further in that religious tradition, and I had theology classes and so on. So like my mind has been immersed in all these like theological topics about religion and God and so on from a very early age, and naturally enough, I just was really interested in that. It's something that I'm super passionate about, and it kind of imbues my life in various ways. So that's the kind of personal historical reason why I'm interested in philosophy of religion. But I also think that there are lots of like good reasons to study philosophy of religion. Like, firstly, it's just incredibly important, I think. I think it's quite significant whether or not there's like this perfectly good, all-powerful, omniscient being at the foundation of reality. That can affect our lives in various ways. It has an effect on what we think about the character of reality. It has an effect, it might give people hope or lack of hope for an afterlife. Who knows? So it's really significant, really important, I think. Secondly, religion is just such a huge part of human life and interpersonal relations, and it has huge impacts on politics and society. So
Right.
I think it's therefore in our interest to have something to say about religion and have intelligent things to say and what clear, well thought out answers to a lot of these questions. And just being able to think critically about these topics will help us in our kind of political dealings with religion and the social side of religion, etc. So there's that. And it's, yeah, I guess those are the main things. It matters. It's significant, not only for ourselves, but also for politics and society and culture at large. So, yeah.
What is your favorite arguments about for God?
Yeah, for God's existence. I mean, favorite. Favorite is an interesting
Yeah,
word, isn't it?
yeah,
That I could interpret that as like, um, what are, what do I think are the most plausible? Or I could interpret like, what do I think are the most, I guess, like, raise the most interesting philosophical questions, the most that I love thinking about most, like, because those can come apart.
yeah.
Um, I guess the ones that I love thinking about most are, I mean, the one that I love thinking about most is probably the Kalam cosmological argument, just because it raises so many fascinating questions in philosophy of time, in the metaphysics of infinity, even abstract objects, because that comes into the debate about whether or not there are actual infinites or whether or not there can be actual infinites. So, like, there are just so many fascinating dimensions of the Kalam. Oh, the nature of causation, just the like. It brings in metaphysics and all these different areas of philosophy that I absolutely love. So that's probably my favorite one to talk about. Um, as for what I find most plausible, it'd probably be something like a contingency argument, some version of it. I don't know, something to the like that Josh Rasmussen and Alexander Proust have defended quite ably. So just something along the lines of, hey, there are things around us which are such that they could have failed to exist. We call those things contingent things, right? So
Yeah.
here's a contingent thing, or
I,
most of the things you look around are contingent, like they could have failed to
I think
existed. Um, and seems a lot of people find it plausible, as I do, that contingent things require some kind of explanation. That's very much supported by our universal experience, and it just seems intuitively plausible to me, at least. And so then we have these principles that there are contingent things around us, and contingent things require an explanation. We'll now focus on the collection of all the contingent things that there are. Per our principle that contingent things require an explanation, that collection is going to have an explanation, but you can't explain why there are those contingent things in terms of some of those contingent things. That's part of the very thing we're seeking an explanation of. It's kind of like a circular explanation, and those are no good.
yeah.
So then, plausibly, we have to appeal to some necessary thing to explain why there are contingent things. And so
Yeah.
that's basically the argument from contingency. Now, people go on to try to say, "Yeah, that must be God." I'm not really convinced by that second stage of reasoning, but at least the first stage is I find it like reasonable. I'm like sympathetic to it. I don't say that these are like knockdown. That this is a knockdown argument or anything like that. Of course, and I don't even think the Kalam, for instance, I don't think the Kalam succeeds. But I just love thinking about it.
I see. If God do exist, what do you think God would look like? This is just a hypothetical
Interesting. What
question.
would God look like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on our concept of God, to be honest. I mean, like, there's this traditional concept of God where, um, God doesn't have a body. He's immaterial. He's non-physical. He's kind of a pure spirit, as it were. He's just kind of like an all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing, supreme, foundational, unlimited mind. That's what God is, and
Yeah.
presumably that doesn't really look like anything. So
Yeah.
I would say the question embeds a presupposition that God would look like something, and God wouldn't look like anything. Now that's under that concept of God, right? There are other concepts of God on which God might look like something. So like Mormons. Have a concept of God, or maybe gods. I'm not quite sure, but I think they're like something like physical beings. I've heard some people say that they're made of like spiritual matter or something like that, but like presumably they would be physical, or excuse me, presumably they would be visible.
Isn't
So what would they look like? I don't know. So yeah, it sort of my answer is that it depends on our concept of God.
okay. I saw you engage in many discussion and debates with many fellow philosophers, scientists, and sometimes theologians. Whom you enjoy engage the most and why? Is
I
it okay if I
smile
ask you
because
that?
is yeah, yeah. I mean, I smile. So my picking out one person and saying this of this person should not be taken as
Favoritism.
downplaying other people's merits or
Yeah.
anything like that. This is not to say that I
Mhm.
don't enjoy discussions with other people, but there is one person with whom I vibe very well, and I just love the way that he thinks and the way that he interacts with people, and it's of course Josh Rasmussen, or to
I
people
see.
formal, it's Doctor Josh Rasmussen. Yes,
Yeah.
he's so wonderful. He's so great. I recommend everyone to check out his work. and he's been super duper important in my philosophical formation. He is so sharp and intelligent, and he's got great books and papers. And just the way that he goes about these discussions is, I think, beautiful, super duper productive. He focuses first on loving his dialectical partner and seeking the truth together with them instead of kind of combating with them and butting heads. He really tries to cultivate intellectual virtues and moral virtues. He's super duper open minded. He praises the other person when the other person brings up a good point. He actually celebrates objections to his views. So instead of getting super defensive and putting his guard up and going after people, he has the joy of inquiry, basically. So it's definitely Josh, hands down.
I just haven't watched the
Yeah,
video.
I've done a few with him. One is on one I especially loved, which is how to discuss the nature of reality or something like that.
Yeah.
I posted it. It was probably two years ago that I posted it. But it was
Yeah.
such a good discussion. We talked about like intellectual virtue, and it was great. I highly recommend people check that out. Yeah. So I mean, honestly, Josh has a lot of like innovative contingency versions of the contingency argument. So I gave a kind of version of the contingency argument earlier. It was just a kind of plain vanilla or bland or bog standard contingency argument. But there are many different versions of the contingency argument. And some of them get kind of technical and fancy, and they use really like new and innovative developments in modal logic and philosophy of religion and so on. So I think it's got to be some of his work on contingency arguments, because it's just so innovative and it's using lots of the contemporary tools of like modal logic. And they're like he makes cases that I'm sympathetic with in that regard. So yeah. I mean, that's not to say that I always agree with Josh. I mean, I've got
Yeah.
at least one paper where I directly go after one of his arguments, and I'm like, this argument doesn't work, and I criticize it. For people who are interested, that paper is called cosmological arguments and branching actualism. No, I think it's the other way around. I think it's called branching actualism and cosmological arguments. So it's not to say that I agree with everything that he writes in this area, but like it's refreshingly innovative and like reasonable. And yeah, I love thinking about it.
Um, is there any practical utility if people mastering the philosophy of God? I think learning philosophy by itself is not really that practical. But philosophy of God, in the other hand, I mean, it's more impractical in my opinion. But what do you think about that? Is there any practical utility?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on your interests and goals. I mean, as lots of like practical utility stuff does. Um, I mean, I think philosophy more generally, firstly. So like what's true of philosophy more generally is also going to be true of philosophy of religion specifically. But I think philosophy more generally has lots of practical utility. Um, I mean, there are lots of personal intellectual benefits that philosophy cultivates, right? I mean, like critical thinking skills, better abilities to detect BS. It's significantly improving your analytical reading and writing if you take like courses in this at the university and especially graduate level. Being able to parse difficult texts and formulate and assess the reasoning contained in various arguments, seeing whether people's conclusions actually follow from the premises so that you don't get taken in by a pyramid scheme, say.
I see.
Pinpointing underlying or implicit assumptions, making distinctions that clarify and precisify debates. I think all of this is super duper practically useful in tons of different jobs that you might have. It's super helpful for the LSAT, GRE, and things like that. In fact, philosophy majors, it's well known that philosophy majors score exceptionally well on the LSAT, GRE, and things like that. But I think it's precisely because philosophy helps cultivate lots of these skills that are tested on these sorts of things. Philosophy helps better inform our like political and moral views, right? Like whether or not we should have democratic societies, why we think that everyone should be treated equally under the law and so on. Like that's based on various moral principles, and that's in the domain of moral philosophy, right? Again, like science, you're not going to be able to like test whether or not everyone has equal inherent worth and dignity or something. So yeah, I think that there are lots of benefits from philosophy, and historically, a lot of the main branches of science and other disciplines have branched off from philosophy. Philosophy is the sort of progenitor for disciplines. Once philosophers of the past have gotten clear on a set of methods and questions and tools to investigate those questions, the field kind of buds off from philosophy and becomes its own discipline. Happened with psychology, it's happened with economics, it's even happened with science, right? Science used to be natural philosophy, etc.
Yeah.
So I think philosophy has lots of practical utility, and a lot of this is going to apply to philosophy of religion. Now, philosophy of religion specifically also has lots of practical utility for precisely the reasons that I was mentioning earlier, right? Religion
Hmm.
is a huge part of human life, and
Yeah.
as a result, I don't know, I think it serves our interests to basically be able to say some intelligent, competent things about religion and religious beliefs and so on. So, I think there are lots of practical benefits here.
So, when I was get myself into philosophy, so I too came from a very religious upbringing. My parents were extremely religious, and when I shown them and to my community that I have interest in philosophy, especially metaphysics and philosophy of religion and God, they start to see me like some kind of a weirdo. And they thought that a philosophy, especially when we questioning God, could make us, this is a very Eastern way of thinking, could make us become crazy, insane, if you will. Um, and I felt back then I felt like kind of bullied in some sense because look at Fuad, he's slowly becoming an atheist, and therefore he's crazy because that's how most of Eastern people think about religion and irreligiousness. So what I try to inform them and most of people in Indonesia especially is that when we try to convince people about thinking philosophically about everything, because I think philosophy is the art of questioning things, in my own words, it will be in the end beneficial for us and it has its practical purposes. Most of people in Indonesia, when talk about philosophy, they always ask something about its practicality. So I think I think this is one of that was one of the question that I really want to ask you, and I'm glad the answer is I will make your answers as the reference when people start asking me about the utility of philosophy in the future.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, another thing to say here, I mean, that I left out is that I don't think the value of something is determined solely by its utility. I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, lots of art isn't very useful. Lots of music isn't very useful. I mean, of course,
Yeah.
like, music is um makes us feel good in various ways. It can help us manage our emotions and so on. But like, still, a lot of art and music isn't as practically useful as, for instance, like like a metropolitan city, like that can get a
Yeah.
lot done and that can affect the
Yeah.
economy and so on. Like that's very practically useful to have those sorts of things, like New York City, etc. But like a lot of the arts, a lot of the things that just make life worth living are not super duper practically useful. So even if philosophy doesn't have practical utility, in my view, it's just profoundly valuable in itself.
Yeah.
And if people don't see that yet, I just invite them to kind of delve into it and see it for themselves. And I think it's just part of like a good life and part of a life worth living is to examine these fundamental questions, like who are we and why are we here? And is there a God? Can I know this God? Can I relate to this God? What's like what's going on around us? Like it's basically I think it's an intrinsically valuable pursuit and it contributes to the good life, even if it doesn't have significant practical utility. But as I said, I don't think that conditional clay, I don't think the antecedent of that conditional is even true. I think it does have significant practical utility. It makes you a much clearer thinker, makes you a much better thinker, allows you to pinpoint underlying assumptions of arguments, see whether or not someone's conclusion follows, evaluate their logic and their reasoning, and just helps you get more true beliefs and have less false beliefs. And who doesn't want that?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. Indonesian culture is very quite very focused in always focused in practicality. Back then, when I start my own YouTube channel, most people asked is, um, how will this channel benefit you in terms of financial? And that's quite frustrating to me because I really want to do it for my own sake. I want to feel a lot better about myself. I want to engage in I want to become a better communicator in my for my own sake. Yeah, people something along the line of it's how would it actually makes money. Um, to be honest, all I want is if this channel give benefit to people, the benefit that I want to give them is to inform about things, especially in philosophy. Gitu. I don't really care about having a lot of money because of this channel. I don't think that's ever become my own goal. So yeah, that's it.
I think that makes so much sense. And I mean, like, people pick up the piano and start to learn some beautiful songs. And,
Yeah.
like, they're not a professional musician. You're not going to make money off that. Why are you doing that? Well, I mean, like, listen, this is contributing to my flourishing. It's bringing value to me and the few around me who are listening and enjoying the music. Even if I don't make much money off of it, it's still bringing value to the world and to me and my life and my friends and so on. You could say the
Mhm.
same thing about your YouTube channel. It's bringing value to you. It's helping you grow in your intellectual capacities and grow in your abilities to communicate, and it's also helping the people who are listening. Even if it's not the whole world listening, but still, you're bringing value to the lives of people who are listening. You're helping them think better. You're helping them think more critically and carefully and cautiously about the fundamental nature of reality, and you're thereby helping them to flourish in various ways as well. So, yeah, I'm totally with you there.
Okay. Next question. Stephen Hawking said something along the line of philosophy is dead. Yeah. Have you ever heard of it? Um, yeah. He said that. I believe he said that. And that kind of sentiment is mirrored by
I think so.
Steven
Yes.
Weinberg. Yeah, Steven Weinberg. I think Weinberg is quite despised philosophy. As a philosopher, how do you rebut that?
Yeah. So I mean, philosophy is dead. So, I mean, one thing to say here, right? One thing to say here is that it's not exactly clear what exactly they're saying that philosophy is dead. I mean, are they saying as a discipline that it's dead, that it's not going? I mean, just empirically speaking, that's false. There are people doing philosophy as a discipline, right? So it's certainly not dead in that sense. Okay, then that's probably not the sense in which he meant it. Okay, well then what is the sense in which he meant it? Like, we need a clearer statement of the view here. Presumably, he's saying something like philosophy can't contribute to knowledge and only science can do that or something like that. I think that's really the sentiment that's driving these guys in saying this. And um, I think the best thing to say there is like, that's a cool philosophical statement, bro. Can you justify it? And of course,
Yeah.
they would have to they'd have to use philosophy to justify that, right?
Yeah.
Science alone certainly can't show us that science alone is the only path to knowledge, right? You're
Yeah.
never going to be able to look into like a test tube and like somehow be able to conclude, ah, yes, the scientific method is the only way that we can come to have knowledge. Like, no, that's a claim about the conditions under which we can gain knowledge. That has to do with the study of knowledge. Epistemology. Episteme means knowledge. Ology
Yeah.
means the study of. Epistemology is the
Mhm.
study of knowledge. That's a branch of philosophy. So if you're making a claim about the conditions under which we can know something, or the conditions of yeah, basically just the conditions of knowledge, then you're making an epistemological claim, and you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and do some philosophy in order to establish that. So I think they're sort of shooting themselves in the foot when they make this claim, because the claim itself cannot be shown scientifically. They're going to have to try to wield philosophical arguments on its behalf. In which case,
Mhm.
they're mistaken in their own
I,
claim that philosophy
I
cannot
agree
produce
with you.
knowledge by their own lights.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Is there any part of philosophy that you're not really good at? And do you plan to improve? For me, I'm not really good at moral philosophy. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of areas of philosophy that I know very little about, and that as a result, I think one could accurately say that I'm not good at those fields of philosophy, just because I know very little about them. I know very little about the debates. If someone came to me with an argument in that area, I would probably not have much of substance to contribute because, I haven't studied that area basically at all. And that's sort of just inevitably the case for most philosophers, in fact, because it's such a ginormous field. It is an amazingly ginormous and varied and multifarious, uh, multifaceted field, and so you can't be an expert in everything in it, and so there's always going to be lots of areas where you just have studied very little, and yeah, I mean that's going to apply to me in various areas. So there are various applied ethics debates that I know very very little about, and that I have not studied basically at all. And so applied ethics just looks at like tangible, concrete moral questions. So like, is euthanasia permissible? Questions like that. Um, Lots of like legal and political philosophy. I'm also like that. Um, like justifications of democracy or justifications for rights to private property and challenges to whether or not we have such rights, etc., or like the nature of rights. I just like haven't studied political and legal philosophy all that much, so there. I just listed two areas. One of them is applied ethics, and another one is political and legal philosophy. And there are many more, of course. I am ignorant of lots of areas of philosophy, and hopefully I can grow in my philosophical knowledge at some point in the future.
What do you think about aesthetics?
Aesthetics.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, I mean, there are a lot of different like subfields within aesthetics, right? So some of it has to do with like art. What's the nature of art? What is a work of art? What is it to aesthetically engage with a work of art and to aesthetically appreciate a work of art? Um, is the an aesthetic value like this is going beyond works of art and also extends to works of like literature and music and so on. Um, we tend to think that these things have a certain kind of value. What is that value? Like, what is the nature of this value? In virtue of what is a certain, say, film valuable? And is it similar or different in virtue of what is a musical piece valuable and a literary work valuable? So, like, what is the nature of this aesthetic value? Is it objective? Is it like a property of these things in and of themselves, independently of our subjective reactions to them? Or is aesthetic value simply a matter of just our subjective reactions to the pieces? Maybe we appreciate them in various ways, and the value just consists in that. So there are these fascinating questions about the nature and source of aesthetic value and art and so on. Aesthetics is a huge field, and there are lots of these interesting questions that I've been highlighting. So I can't really speak in broad brushstrokes about the field of aesthetics, but I can at least say that it's a massive field, and this is just a sub branch of philosophy, and within it there are tons of different sub questions that you can explore.
Yeah.
And as I've hoped to kind of give a sense of, I think that there are some really interesting questions in this area. And I mean, like this is all kind of closely bound up with like what it is to be human. I mean, like people have often said that we're rational animals, but we are also artistic animals, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We are creatures that engage in art and literature and music and so much more. And that's part of what makes us human and part of what makes
Mhm.
life valuable. So I do think these are pretty important questions and really fascinating questions. So yeah.
I I originally very hate aesthetic philosophy because I think I really hate things that doesn't have objective answer, and because especially philosophy of values doesn't have objective answer. So yeah, I kind of hate aesthetics,
Yeah,
but
interesting. That no, that's
uh-huh.
interesting. I mean, yeah, I'll let you go on in a second, but that's interesting because that is
Okay,
itself a claim within ethics that is controversial, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Actually, a surprising number of philosophers think that aesthetic value is objective, that things are objectively valuable, regardless of whether or not we appreciate them, or regardless of what we think about them or feel about them. And that's an interesting thesis. To many, it strikes people as implausible because people think like beauty's in the eye of the beholder, like aesthetic value, like it's just purely subjective. But a lot of philosophers question that. So anyway, I wanted to say that is an aesthetic thesis, and many aestheticians and philosophers disagree with it.
yeah. But now since you worded your answers like that, I started to find the interesting part about aesthetics. I myself is a musician, so I engage in many aesthetics things, and I really I really aware that by becoming a fans of a certain football club is makes you engage in aesthetics, because I think in the end, what I really like about my own club is because it has some aesthetics value in regards how they play.
Yes.
And yeah, you agree with me in that, right? Yeah, because
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I think
I
yeah. Go on, go on.
okay. I think the reason I choose Manchester United, besides of the influence my uncle gave 20 years ago, is because I really like the way the style of their game. Back then in early 2000, their philosophy of football is a kick and rush. I don't think it's in terms of a modern beauty standard. It's not that beautiful, but I think it gives the most result in terms of scoring goals. That's why back then I really love Manchester United. So yeah, I understood that by engaging in these kind of topics, I myself already speaking about aesthetic philosophically. So
Yeah,
so yeah,
exactly.
so
Exactly.
yeah,
That's, I mean, I've always thought that there's like a huge, almost artistic aesthetic dimension to sports, and especially, well, I can't say especially soccer, but like definitely soccer, because that's what I engage with, or football. That's what I engage with. And one of the reasons why I love it is just because it is almost like an art form, like you see the beautiful skills and talent of these players and the way that they move their legs and their bodies in various ways, and like me trying to like imitate that, or come up with my own skills, and like make certain passes and engage in certain tactics. Like it involves so much like ingenuity and talent and knowledge, practical knowledge. I think it's just beautiful. And yeah, there are certain styles of play. Like that's one of the main reasons why I supported Arsenal back in like 2009, 2010. The way that they played was they were like the English Barcelona. They played like tiki
yeah,
taka football. This was this
yeah,
was Wenger ball, right? Arsene Wenger.
yeah.
The way that he played was just this beautiful kind of tiki taka, exactly. And I
Hmm.
love that, and I fell in love with it. And yeah, that's a sort of aesthetic reaction. So yeah, and it's soccer is such a big part of my life that I think it's interesting that it intersects with philosophy. It's surprising that I haven't done work in like philosophy of sports and so on,
Yeah,
but I guess you can't specialize in everything. That's what I will
yeah.
say. You can't specialize in everything, and I just, yeah, it's too difficult.
Mm. Okay, so back then in 2009, Barcelona played tiki taka. Of course it's a beautiful football. Why didn't you choose Barcelona instead? Why did you choose Arsenal? I think Barcelona played tiki taka better than Arsenal. Oh, why? This is a
Yeah, I mean
philosophical question.
yeah, I
Right,
mean
right?
that it is probably true that they played it better than Arsenal. I mean they played it better than everyone in the world at that time. So
Yeah.
we let's see. Um, I mean, I think the reason is mainly for like contingent historical reasons. Like I just happened to watch some Arsenal games
Mhm.
before I saw any
Oh,
other major like competitions and so on. Um, and that's probably the main reason. It's just I kind of came across them. Um, and I mean there is the like at least here, like the Premier League is played on TVs way more than any other league. Like I can't even find like Ligue 1 and Serie A on
yeah.
TV.
Hmm.
And occasionally I will find La Liga on TV. But the
Yeah.
Premier League is always on. And so um, I think that's probably another reason, which is just like, again, I've just been fed the Premier League from a very young age. And I just fell in love with Arsenal. So yeah.
So you believe that there's no free will in you deciding to become Arsenal fan?
There may have been, but our free will is indeed shaped by our circumstances, right? So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
if you're presenting me with only chocolate and vanilla cake, I'm only going to be able to choose chocolate or vanilla. Whereas in different circumstances, you presented me with chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, red velvet, etc. I was not so limited, and so I could have chosen differently than those two. Even though on both occasions I still had free will, right? So, but yeah, it's an interesting question. To what extent free will is implicated in like uh, favoriting, like choosing a favorite team or like a favorite uh, artwork, or like things like that. That's an interesting question.
Yeah. Okay. I have two final questions. The first one is, in your opinion, what are the qualities that make a philosopher good or great even?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Tough question. I certainly can't give a comprehensive list, but I can give some qualities that I think make for a good philosopher. So Firstly, in terms of there are kind of two dimensions of it. One is in terms of their work and their research and so on, and the other is in terms of kind of character traits. Okay, so I'll start with the work. So in terms of their work, a good philosopher will be incredibly clear. They will be precise. They'll be rigorous when rigor is called for. They will they'll be innovative. They'll kind of advance our knowledge, our philosophical knowledge. Um, they'll be relevant. Right? They're not just like looking at some totally irrelevant, totally uninteresting philosophical problem, but instead they'll make innovative, fascinating progress on a topic of interest, of relevance. So yeah, clear, precise. It's cogently argued. Their work is cogently argued. They consider objections. They make distinctions. They don't strawman their opponents. They give reasons in support of their view instead of just asserting things, right? And cogent reasons, forceful reasons that really pull on you. And they challenge assumptions. They're not just willing to take for granted what everyone else takes for granted. They're actually willing to challenge and question things. So it's all those sorts of things: clarity, precision, a kind of questioning character, innovative, etc. That all characterizes their work. I think that's the work of a good philosopher. What about the kind of the person? Well, a good philosopher, I think, is going to have both moral and intellectual virtues. So in terms of intellectual virtues, they're going to be open-minded. They're not just going to like dogmatically hold on to their views, especially in spite of like counter-evidence or countervailing considerations. They're going to be sort of appropriately responsive to the reasons and the evidence available to them. So they're going to be open-minded. They're not going to be dogmatic. They are going to have a flaming love for truth, right? They're going to put truth center stage rather than status or your own tribe or pride or anything like that. So they're going to put truth center stage. They have a love of truth. They're also intellectually humble, right? So they don't think too highly of themselves and their own abilities. They're aware that people very often can reasonably disagree with their conclusions, and they have the kind of appropriate modesty and humility to recognize their own limitations, recognize where they may not know something or where they need more justification or they need to research something further. They're going to say that and they're going to own up to that. Intellectual curiosity, right? I think philosophers are curious. A good philosopher is a curious person. They are curious about just the fundamental nature of reality and our epistemic access to it and how to live well within it and so on. And they have kind of intellectual perseverance as well, right? They're not just going to take the easy road, the easy answers. They're not just going to take someone's word just because they said it. They want to see the reasons. They want to do the legwork. They want to be able to see things for themselves and to reason through them and sort of to equip themselves with reasons and justifications for their views instead of just taking people's word for it and just going with the flow. So I think that's the kind of intellectual virtue side of a good philosopher. And a good philosopher also has moral virtue, right? So a good philosopher loves their dialectical partners instead of kind of alienates them. And a good philosopher tries to build bridges between warring factions and tribes. They're not tribalistic. They're not thinking people who disagree with them are stupid or irrational and are demonic and should be avoided at all costs. A good philosopher instead loves people who disagree with them. They rejoice in seeing objections and criticisms to their view because it's an opportunity to discover more truth, right? And that goes back to their love of truth. So yeah, a good people treats other people well, and they love other people, and they love truth. So yeah, a good philosopher's work has all those qualities. They basically have exceptional work, and they also have exceptional character traits, both along the dimensions of intellectual virtue and moral virtue. I think that's what makes a good philosopher.
Okay. Oh, that's a very beautiful answer, Joe. I really like that answer. Okay.
Thank you.
The last question. So I have my own philosophical idea. I would like you to criticize or maybe comment on the quote within my idea. So I said this: the difference between philosophy and science is philosophy asks and science answers. If science managed to answer the question philosophy asked, then philosophy asks another question for science to again answer. What is your opinion about that?
So I certainly think that that captures some important elements of philosophy, right? So
Yeah.
I definitely think it captures some important elements of philosophy. Like philosophers do indeed, especially philosophers of physics and philosophers of biology and philosophers of science more generally, but as well as metaphysicians and philosophers of time and so on, like they ask lots of questions and they formulate these questions. And oftentimes, once they've kind of properly formulated a question, they'll then either engage in interdisciplinary research and work with scientists, or they will basically just like serve scientists by clarifying certain debates and distinctions and giving the kind of conceptual fruits of that to science to use their questions and their conceptual tools in science's own investigations to give us answers to various empirical questions. So what you said does capture like a good deal of philosophy. I don't think it captures like all of philosophy or like the core essence of philosophy. And I think the main reason is because, there's lots of philosophy, firstly, that gives answers, right? The
Yeah.
philosophy has questions and philosophy
I
gives
agree.
answers, right? We could do ethical reasoning and then come to various conclusions and
Yeah.
arguably come to have ethical knowledge not produced by science, right? So philosophy can give us the answers that philosophy itself poses. Um, and also, I think, yeah, like there are lots of philosophical questions that science in principle can't answer, ones that we were going through earlier on in our discussion. So I do think what you said, again, captures like a good deal of philosophy, and that's good about it. But also, I think it leaves out a lot of elements of philosophy as well. So,
Yeah.
and we should keep those elements in mind.
Yeah, I just realized that my quote there pretty much inspired by Sam Harris with his objective morality idea. Yeah,
Mm.
I have to be aware about whom inspired me. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. This is the very first time that people actually criticizes or commenting on my ideas, because it's really hard to find people here in Indonesia that could engage in such discussion. Now, before we finish the podcast, do you have anything to say to Indonesian audience? Perhaps maybe you want to tell them about your channel and your books, maybe?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, thank you for having me on. It was a lovely discussion, and I hope the audience could gain something from this, and that they can
Yeah.
see value in philosophy, and that it can kind of inspire them to pick up a philosophy book or something like that. So I think they will enjoy my YouTube channel, of course. As I said at the beginning, it's the objectively the best YouTube channel that has ever existed. So
Again, I
there's
agree.
that.
Yeah.
So it's called Majesty of Reason. And what I do on there is I do two main things. I host discussions between philosophers, and I also make lecture videos of my own. That's the two main things that I do. And it mainly has to do with philosophy of religion and apologetics and counter-apologetics and so on. But I also dip into epistemology, metaethics, metaphysics, philosophy of time, lots of different areas of philosophy on there that I go over. Um, I guess of particular relevance to what we talked about today would be my playlist, Doing Philosophy, right? So they could just go to Majesty of Reason, my YouTube channel, and then click on the little playlist button, and it'll show them all these
Mhm.
cool playlists that I have on these various philosophical topics. And one of them is Doing Philosophy. And therein, I explain what philosophy is, how to do it well. I give lots of book recommendations for like beginners, like how do I get into philosophy? How do I learn better? How do I improve my philosophical thinking and reasoning and so on? I go through all that in that playlist. So I guess one episode in particular that I think people would appreciate, and it has lots of resources at the end. In fact, two that I will mention. First one is my video, What is Philosophy? That has lots of recommendations. And then the second one of my favorite videos on my channel, is called How to Analyze Arguments Like a Philosopher. So those are two that I'd recommend people to check out. And yeah, as for my books, my first book was self-published through Kindle Direct Publishing. It's called The Majesty of Reason, A Short Guide to Critical Thinking and Philosophy. And therein, I basically just try to give people tangible tools to have productive, love-oriented, truth-oriented exchanges and conversations about philosophical topics, as well as giving them a kind of basic intro to philosophical reasoning and critical thinking in the context of philosophy. So Yeah, there's that. That's my first book, very cheap on Amazon. My second book is published with an academic press, so as I said, it's going to be a lot more expensive. It was peer reviewed, went through all that whole process. It is called Existential Inertia and Classical Theistic Proofs. It is a work in philosophy of religion and metaphysics and philosophy of time. We talk about existential inertia and how it relates to various alleged proofs of God's existence. So, and we're critical of the proofs. We think that yeah, we think they don't succeed. But yeah, people check those out if you're interested. You can find links to both of those on my website, and you can find them if you look them up. And again, I know the Existential Inertia and Classical Theistic Proofs book is expensive, so if you are unable to afford it, you can email me, and I have ways to help you. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, Joe from Majesty of Reason, thank you very much.
Thank you.